a story is a journey. Yes, it's a journey in which there are characters that go through some sort of problem, and the main character wants something badly, and by the end of the story, he or she has achieved it. And in the character's journey, the listeners are able to see some of their own lives unfold as well. So a story essentially is a vehicle through which we can see our own lives being played out. A story is some form of truth, which is packaged in the form of a beautiful narrative, which maybe, as said by itself, could become quite hard to swallow. But if something is presented in the form of a story, it makes it a little more easy to digest. So stories are essentially truth, but that are well told. A story is also a map of possible roles and worlds that you can occupy, and worlds that you did not know existed, but open up because you have just listened to the story, and it has revealed to you something that you did not know existed. And so it might then open up your senses to new possibilities. And a story is a mirror through which you can see reflections about life, about your life, about life in general, about the world, about the way it works, and so on. And at this point, I also want to bring attention to a fact that because of all of these powers that a story has, it can also be used as a weapon. Not much is usually talked about it, but storytelling also has a bit of a dark side to it. If used in devious ways, it can be used as a weapon to manipulate and to control the listener or the audience. And we can see examples of that today unfolding right in front of us. You just have to take a look at the news. You'll know how storytelling is being used in manipulative ways. So that's just something to watch out for and be cautious about as consumers of story. And moving on, what is storytelling, therefore? So, like the world in which Gaka lived, in which there were no stories, we understand that stories were perhaps the oldest form of communication. And we know this we have enough historical evidence now to suggest that a lot of information was passed on in the form of stories, whether it was in the form of rock paintings that we find from prehistoric times. Stories have always been used to pass on critical information, right? So just imagine a time where you're sitting around a bonfire with nothing to do, and then somebody in that community or that clan wants to come and talk to you about this great hunt that they've had, and gathers everybody around the fire and says, what happened today? I was hiding behind this bush waiting for this lion, and as it drew near, I took out my bow and arrow, and I strung it, waited on my haunches, and then just as the lion came close by, I let my arrow go, and boom, there it was. And now this becomes suddenly a very exciting thing for people in that clan to listen to, because through this story, they're actually constructing meaning of something that they may encounter in the future. All the young hunters listening now know how to go about hunting a lion. Now, if the story was perhaps not shared, they may not have the value of another person's experience through which they can build their own. So through history, we've seen that stories have been used to communicate a lot of critical information, and people have constructed meaning around the world using stories. Now, just like in the story of Gaka and the rock face, storytelling is at its core the building of a relationship. When a story is passed on from the storyteller to the listener, it's based on trust, because the audience somehow believes that the storyteller is going to take them into the unknown world and bring them out of it with a lot of care and not going to just leave them, high and dry, so to speak. So, and all of this is unsaid. So, through the storytelling experience, a bond has been fostered between the storyteller and the listener of the story. So this is what makes storytelling so special. And you could think about the times when you may have been listening to a story from told by your grandparents or any of the elders in your family. uh, you're able to conjure up. You may not remember the story itself, but you can actually recall how it made you feel, the closeness that you experienced between the person and who was telling the story and yourself. Now, that's something that stays with you long after the person has gone and long after the story has been told. So essentially, stories help us become closer. So my favorite saying is, the shortest distance between two people is a story. So that's what storytelling is all about. And of course, we know that stories are used to educate, to entertain, and to engage audiences for various purposes. And it therefore becomes a very powerful tool when we talk about education. So, more on that a little later. Storytelling helps the listener, and in many cases, very young children to whom stories are being told. It makes them imagine. Therefore, it helps in image making, visualization, and what is called sense making. So we're able to put a whole set of episodes together through the story and make sense of what it means for us in our lives. We may not have had that experience, but stories actually help us connect a lot of dots that we may not have known existed. So stories are able to take us into the unknown and bring us out with a slightly changed or a shift in perspective. And therefore, storytelling is an art. The way in which a story is told is an art form that needs to be practiced and takes years and years of training to get experienced and proficient at. And it's also a science because there's a certain structure for storytelling that makes the brain process the information in a certain way. And we know this from a lot of neuroscience research that is available now. That storytelling actually is a very effective way of communicating something. It could be any concept, it could be any topic, but if it's communicated through the form of a story, the results have been much more impactful. So therefore, understanding how stories work means that you can get straight to the mind and the heart of a person. And now, therefore, who is a storyteller? If stories are everywhere and if they're all around us, we are all storytellers, therefore. But there's a slight difference between who a storyteller is every day, since we all are. We're making sense of this world using stories. Everything in our life is a small story, and all these stories add up and become our grand life story. But there are some people who have chosen to use storytelling for a particular purpose. And in the modern world today, that's perhaps whom you refer to as a professional storyteller. But a storyteller always existed in every indigenous community around the world, whether it was the griots in Africa or the Navajo storytellers of Native America, or in India, you have people like the Baul singers who are also, traditional storytellers, and many other. Every tribe, in fact, had its own storyteller who was a very important person. And that person was seen as the keeper of stories, somebody who received stories from a predecessor and cared for those stories and used them very mindfully, passed them on, under the promise that the stories will be further passed on.